it's harder for merchants to understand what problem they're solving for. So we thought maybe if answering a few questions, you could get a lot more depth and understanding of what the problems the customer is experiencing, what their goals are, and then how you position your product and your marketing accordingly.
In my conversation today with Gen Furakawa, we talked about the future of e-commerce, how quizzes simulate the interactions with customers in a store, NFTs, the environments as it relates to capitalism, Web3, and Gen's life as a digital nomad. I've thoroughly enjoyed it, and I hope that you do too. So yeah, how's it going, Gen? Nice to have you on the podcast.
Thanks so much, Connor. Nice to connect.
Yeah, how are you doing today?
Fantastic. I am in Austin. It's like 90 degrees and play basketball, and in the weeds. There's always content to create and things to think about in the e-commerce marketing world. So busy, happy, productive, doing well.
Awesome. That's so good to hear. Yeah, so I wanted to get started. I know that you're on quite a lot of other podcasts, and I've heard you speak in great depths about quizzes. And it seems that you know an awful lot about marketing. But I wanted to know, who you are and how you came to be interested in what you do now.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks. That's a unique way to start, and I appreciate it. So I am I'm based in Austin, Texas, born and raised in New York City, and ended up in Austin from California. I was working for a company called Junglescout, which is an Amazon product research tool, helps people find products to sell on Amazon. And we started remote. I was living in San Francisco at the time. And we opened an office in Austin when the team started to grow and we needed a headquarters. So that was in 2018, which brought me here. And I just bring that up because the people that I'm working with now were also part of the founding team at Junglescout. So we started working together in 2015. My co-founders are Az and Diedrich, and they're developers, kind of like built out the first version of the web app in Junglescout. So we have a long history of working together and work well together, which has been fantastic and a lot of fun. And in 2020, kind of like in the middle of the pandemic, we'd all left Junglescout at that point, kind of doing our own thing, and realized that we wanted to work together and stay in the e-commerce space, but more in the Shopify space. So Amazon marketing is really focused around SEO and paid ads. So you might have your listing and you're optimizing your listing to focus on people searching for a specific widget. But Shopify is different. So Shopify, people might land on your site and you can have just like maybe one product, like let's say it's a multivitamin, but people end up there for lots of different reasons. Maybe it's to improve their immunity system, or maybe it's to improve sleep, or maybe it's just for general health or aging. Whatever it is, people might have different needs. And it's harder for merchants to understand what problem they're solving for. So we thought maybe if answering a few questions, you could get a lot more depth and understanding of what the problems the customer is experiencing, what their goals are, and then how you position your product and your marketing accordingly. We did a fair amount of customer research, started building out the product. We launched in 2021. And at this point, we're growing. Hundreds of Shopify merchants are using our product, getting a lot of value out of it. And in the course of launching, the macro state of marketing has changed a lot, which I'm sure you're aware of, and your listeners are as well, in terms of iOS 14 launches, iOS 15, third-party cookies being deprecated, or that's kind of like coming later in maybe 2023, 2024, GDPR and basic privacy issues. All that's to say that the reliance of direct-to-consumer brands on ad networks, like Facebook, Google, YouTube, Instagram, the cost per clicks have been increasing. The targeting has become more nebulous, harder to create targeted campaigns, and therefore cost per acquisition in general has increased. So there's a real urgency and need for merchants to understand their customers better, as in capturing zero-party data, and build a direct relationship with them. So that could be email, that could be SMS, but basically owned channels, as opposed to paying for ads, which Zuckerberg could be raising rates on ad clicks, very quickly. And so this importance and urgency of gathering customer data has really changed the landscape of what we thought we were building when we started in 2020.
I really want to talk about this further. Customers are smartening up. I myself have Brave, the browser, and I don't see any ads ever. Like, I jailbroke my phone. I don't want to see ads ever again.
Yeah.
What do you think that's going to do to Shopify, to Magneto, to all of these companies that rely on sort of, that funnel?
Oh yeah. Magneto. I thought about, what is Magneto? Is Marvel? Magento. You're
Oh
referring
yeah,
to Magento.
Magenta. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah. Yeah. So what it'll do, I think, is basically like brands are moving away in terms of their marketing spend and marketing mix, moving away from paid ads. And so there's more focus on like customer experience is what I've been seeing a lot of. So it is having a brand. It's putting forward the narrative of the founder story and the product and the benefits of your product measured against what the customer's needs are. So that's where personalization, just kind of at a high level, is becoming more important. And I think one way to differentiate your customer experience, your brand experience and shopping experience from other competitors. So whereas say in 2015, it was far easier to sell a widget, slap your private label on it and then put it out there. And then you're optimizing your listing, or you're running ads to a landing page that's been optimized. Now that's not so much the case, because the barriers to entry have lowered, so it's easier to launch a product. So that's where the narrative becomes more important. I think that's where what you know about your customers becomes really important. So there's this thing called the customer experience gap. And the customer experience gap, I think, is a huge opportunity. Basically, customers are looking for personalized experiences and will reward those brands that give them personalized experiences in the form of higher average order value, more repeat purchases, and ultimately higher lifetime value. But those that do not execute on that are just not going to kind of like keep pace and won't get the wallet share of the brands that personalize. The challenge is, and where the gap comes in, is that brands are struggling to deliver on that. So whether it is a matter of the data that they have, because ultimately personalization comes down to what data what you know about somebody that you're going to be sending them a particular campaign or automation or segment them in a certain way. If you don't have anything of that nature, then you can't really personalize. You have nothing to personalize on. And so those brands that don't have the data and aren't using even what they do have will fall behind, and that customer experience gap will remain. But those brands that do execute on it effectively will see an increase in average order value, in conversion rate, and all the things that contribute to top line revenue. So anyway, it's a long answer to your question of how the change in data availability can impact e-commerce merchants. And so that's my take on it.
It probably links quite nicely to your company. Can you explain to people who aren't familiar how your quizzes work and what you're trying to do to connect that customer gap?
Yeah, totally. So the basically an e-commerce quiz, we can start there, is just answering a few questions, likely also capturing a lead. So that's an email or SMS, and then recommending a product. So if you think of walking into a brick and mortar store where you have a sales associate who's asking you a few questions like, hey, Connor, what are you in the market for? What brings you in the store? What challenges are you having now? And then the sales associate is maybe thinking through how to solve Connor's specific needs with the products that we have in our inventory. And so essentially a quiz is doing that at scale. So there are a lot of the highest DTC brands or high growth DTC brands. You might think of Warby Parker or Hims or Hers or Roman. So yeah, basically these brands will be leveraging quizzes in their shopping experience to kind of like guide you to simplify the buying process. So in the same way that you're walking into a store, the quiz acts as the same way to simplify the buying process for you.
Yes, that's a very simple analogy. Something that's interesting, I guess, with the quiz is like when you speak to somebody in a store, you have like ad infinitum possibilities, as to, only limited by what the store can sell you. Is it the same in a quiz, or is it more kind of like tailored to make people make a choice? How does that like logic work?
So you mean to recommend a product or not?
Yeah, I guess I'm saying like, is the quiz tailored to, push a product, or is it tailored to explore options for the customer?
I see. Yeah, great question. So it could be either. Essentially, it kind of depends on the main goal of the product. So, for example, there's a product recommendation quiz, and so we have a lot of our customers that use a product recommendation quiz. So, based on Connor's needs, so we might ask some basic information like what's your gender, what's your age, and let's say it's for a multivitamin. What maybe like what's your health routine, or what are you trying to achieve? Then recommending a product might make sense. And so one company that we have that uses our product is called Telixir, and so that's like an adaptogen brand, a mushroom tea, and they're seeing great success with the quiz because people don't necessarily know which adaptogen tea is right for them, because how many people actually know or are familiar with mushroom-based teas? Even though it's an ancient adaptogen or medicine, it's relatively new to the modern consumer. So that's where a quiz can simplify things and break it down in ways that we're familiar with. So we do know what problem we're having or what health challenges we're having, but we don't know how that relates to whether it's a lion's mane mushroom or a reiki mushroom. We do know what tastes we like, but we don't know what specific flavors of Telixir makes sense. So that's where pairing the kind of like ingesting the information of what the customer is looking for and then recommending a product makes sense. But there are other examples, like let's say Beard Brand, for example. So Beard Brand is a big men's care brand. They start with selling razors. They sell other things like shampoo, fragrances, facial products. They have a personality quiz. So that's one that's a little bit more like fun and whimsical and less about putting a product that makes sense to the shopper. And instead it's more about like gathering data, I think. So you're saying like, all right, what are you, the type of quiz, the premise of the quiz is what type of beardsman are you? Basically, like out of 6 categories of potential men are you, what are you? And that's just their way of gathering this data about you. So and then the email, and then from there they're using that to segment and create more targeted campaigns via email and SMS.
Very cool. So right now it's a sort of text-based platform. Do you see for Prehook or other quiz companies like adopting like an AI assistant that actually has a phone call with customers?
Yeah.
What do you think about the future?
Question. That's a great question. I think that video is big. I think that live video is big. I think if you look at China, for example, China is a little bit ahead of the curve in terms of e-commerce and tech adoption. They do a lot of live calls or live sales, kind of like in America, there's QVC, Home Shopping Network, that kind of stuff. But it's done on mobile, and there are people that are selling millions of dollars on each call. That's not a quiz per se. It's more of like a video-based selling, but in essence, it kind of like captures some of what we're trying to do in terms of learning about customers or showing, interacting with customers and kind of like demoing the product. So yeah, I think ideally down the line, we can get to a place where video is one way. So Typeform actually has a video-based quiz product called Video Ask. And so that's more like, pre-recorded video, and then it's like choose your own adventure. So we do have
Sorry,
customers.
just before you go on, can you just explain how Typeform ties into Prehook and?
It doesn't at all.
Okay.
It doesn't. Yeah. Their Typeform, is a quiz and survey platform, and they have a great product, but not really so applicable to e-commerce in terms of the integrations and third-party apps on it. But I just use that as an example of where like video works nicely in a quiz-based platform.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, when you speak to suppliers in China, it is kind of overwhelming or just different when, they hit you up on WeChat and they really give you the time. That's something that's lacking in Western e-commerce, is just put up the automation. Customers will, go through the process. But in China, it's like, hey, how's it going, dear? And then,
yeah. Okay. Oh, so you have, are you an e-commerce seller as well?
Oh, no. I did sell some just when I started working here, just to learn the ropes and, understand e-commerce. It's funny, actually. I got a video gig yesterday with an NFT company.
Oh,
And then,
nice.
and then I checked out your Twitter this morning and I was like, sweet, let's dive into NFTs.
Totally.
I mean,
Yeah. That's a little off topic from e-commerce and quizzes, but I am working on an NFT, kind of like a side project, NFT analytics tool.
okay, cool.
So if you want to hear about it, happy to go into NFTs and Web3 stuff.
Yeah, no, we people are very interested in that for sure. Yeah.
Oh, okay,
I
cool.
mean, myself as well.
Yeah. So what we're building is called the Yeti.xyz. So it's basically an NFT analytics tool. So assuming we're kind of like on the same page with what NFTs are, and the way that they are purchased on a secondary market is often on OpenSea. So OpenSea is kind of like the biggest secondary market where people are buying, selling, discovering, trading NFTs. The challenge is that for NFTs, a lot of the value is derived from the rarity. So right now there's a lot of one of the popular trends is like profile picture. So that's why if you scroll down Twitter, you won't see anybody's real face anymore. It'll be like, a pixelated punk and crypto punk, or it'll be an ape, a bored ape or a mutant ape. So these like profile pictures kind of like have taken over Twitter in some sense. It's the rarity that dictates the value. The only challenge is how do you actually quantify the rarity? So there are tools that do that, but that's basically what our tool is doing is a Chrome extension for when you're on OpenSea. It will quickly show you what the rarity is of a given project. And then therefore, if you're kind of like looking to get into a project, you can quickly understand the rarity to know if the asset, the NFT that you may buy is underpriced or overpriced, so it's just kind of to give a compass for buyers, collectors, investors to know maybe the true value of an NFT.
Cool. How does that work under the hood? Is it like scanning lots of different chains and layers, or is it just looking on the marketplaces?
Yeah, great question. So it's strictly at this point just for Ethereum and OpenSea. OpenSea is they've released Solana NFTs. So that's kind of like a separate thing. But under the hood, each profile picture would have like a group of characteristics. So let's just say, for example, it's like the face and the expression, the eyes, the hat. And so there are a certain number of each of these traits. And so we're calculating based on kind of the frequency that a certain trait might appear. So out of 10,000 NFTs, you can have kind of like a rating based on an aggregation of these different traits and how often they're appearing. And ultimately, you're able to rank whether it's 100 or 5,000 or 10,000 or more. You're able to rank how these are based on rarity. And then from there, you can see like where an NFT might fit in kind of like the grand scheme of rarity and value.
Okay, so is this plugin free or would users pay for this?
So we're still building it, and probably will be live in 6 weeks or so. And the pricing is still TBD. We'll definitely have parts of it that will be free, and then we'll have parts of it that will be kind of feature gated behind a paywall.
Yeah, fair enough. That's genius. That's probably something that is very hard to understand when you're like browsing NFTs. Is just the disconnect between value and hype. So something that you're trying to fix there is probably pretty useful for people.
Totally. And yeah, apologies if that was kind of like off the deep end, because I've like, it's kind of a crazy, wacky world in some ways, and I'm like deep down the rabbit hole. So the fact that people be like, who cares about this? Well, it's a whole different subject, but I do think that there is going to be a close intersection between e-commerce and NFTs. Don't think we're there yet, but Shopify is rolling out their beta of their NFT platform on Shopify Plus, so brands will be able to mint and distribute NFTs directly from Shopify. The only challenge is for that to really work, that like ideally a brand has a significant following already, and there's demand an NFT that's been released. So you've seen Nike, Under Armour, Adidas, they've all kind of like partnered and done their own thing with NFTs. And then when you fast forward a few years, maybe, and everybody is kind of building out their own metaverse, like avatar and clothing, then it might make more sense. Like, oh, you got these, Nike shoes, NFT. And so that's kind of like where the intersection of NFTs and e-commerce might come.
Do NFTs actually get moved? Like it's on chain, it's on a ledger, forever. And then you say to OpenSea or Shopify, I'm going to buy that NFT. Does it actually move? Can you explain that process to me? Because I'm kind of skeptical as to if it actually moves or if it gets kind of, meta tagged as not there anymore and it's now here.
So I'm not a developer and I'm not technical in that sense. But I think that the way it would work, and so you can go to etherscan.io, for example, and you can link to that from any OpenSea page for any asset. Mm-hmm. And what does happen is a transaction occurs where ownership is transferred from Connor to Gen. And so that is written into the ledger, and it is immutable, and it is undisputable, and it is permissionless. So it happens, if I buy it from you via OpenSea or mm-hmm. any other platform, then ownership of that transfers from your wallet to my wallet, and you can see it on OpenSea. So there's a transaction hash that occurs with that sale. And from that point, it is full, it's all of this on the blockchain is fully public, permissionless. So I think that's where, to answer your question, it's not moved per se, but ownership and wallet ownership is transferred. Yeah,
it's going to be interesting to try and convince the public of that value. But I mean, the only thing I can see now is like the art, the JPEGs for, Twitter profiles. What do you actually foresee, if any, people selling on Shopify through NFTs?
Yeah. So you've seen, or there are brands that are doing this. Like let's say some of these brands like Bored Apes, they've launched a limited release merch. So you have to be a token holder of a Bored Ape in order to buy the hat, the sweatshirt, the basketballs, jerseys. And so the way it works, like on Shopify, is they validate that you're holding the token, and then you're able to add it to cart and check out. But it's all gated by that validation, basically scanning your wallet. So that's probably the most like realistic and next use case is that it's exclusive drops. Other ways are loyalty. So loyalty, because ultimately an NFT can grant access and build communities. So if you hold an NFT, let's say it's like, your Bored Ape and Adidas collaboration, with that NFT that you're holding, you can maybe get exclusive access to events for only Bored Ape and Adidas, or it could be research groups, private beta research groups for particular products, or it could be like a loyalty card, and people are getting airdropped, basically sent things for free because they hold it. So a lot of it is basically the equivalent of like a loyalty card or a VIP card that people are commonly aware of and use, but this is just like maybe a different way of transacting in that.
No, that's a lovely description. I'm keen to see how that plays out. I am very interested in the governance aspect of the whole thing, but I'm just kind of skeptical as to if it's building community or if it's just building another veneer of exclusivity. But I guess we'll just find out.
I mean, it is, but that's part of it. And that's why the value of CryptoPunks is so astronomical, is because, well, first is because it was the first, but then also you might see people like Jay-Z are part of it, or Snoop Dogg or Serena Williams. And so they're all CryptoPunks holders. In being a CryptoPunk holder, you all of a sudden have like access to them, and you're part of a group. So it is that level of exclusivity, but maybe at a deeper level, it's the ability to form connections or kind of interact with people of a certain ilk, or people that are and ultimately it's these relationships that can compound into bigger things. And so that's a lot of the allure, is what group you're in.
Yeah, no, that's fair enough. I can see it working quite well with like a podcast, actually. Like you have a token and you can kind of say, vote on things. Like, oh, I'd love for you to interview again. And then you just, have a bit more of a, I think that's where the power lies, is like, it's less of like a, because you don't really gain, access to people through an NFT. You can just message anybody, on Facebook or WhatsApp or Twitter. But what you do gain, I guess, is like a authority to vote. Maybe you just have one voice with that token. Or
yeah.
The thing that I'm scared about though is just like people who are, more wealthy have more tokens, and then it kind of doesn't fulfill its promise of like, revolutionizing everything. It's just like, if you have more tokens, you have more say and things like that.
Yeah, I hear you. But how crazy it was that just even 1 year ago, May 2021, like Bored Apes kind of blew up. So you or I could have put a few $100s and gotten a Bored Ape then. And now they're, the floor
10
is
ETH.
maybe, yeah, well,
even...
now, geez, I don't even know, 100 plus, but, in that sense, it is a little bit democratized. So those who are maybe early, and I still think that there are a ton of potential future blue chip projects. And so that's ideally what we're trying to solve with this product, is making it easier to discover and buy those.
Yeah. No, that's a really compassionate angle on your project, is making sure that people don't get like duped into buying the next ape when it's actually probably going to go nowhere.
Everybody's buying or making the next ape. And yeah, there's so much saturation now. So, whether people are calling it a bear market or not, it's not as frothy of a market as it was, like in 2021. But I think it will come back. And as you've mentioned, like the use cases and the market, those who are holding NFTs, I think will only increase, because in some ways, their hand will be forced, and it will be a necessity. And in some ways, it's like what we have now will only expand.
No, I'm keen to see it.
Yeah.
I just want to pivot slightly. You're a very experienced authority in e-commerce, Junglescout, Prehook, and now you're going into NFTs. From my perspective, I'm slightly worried about e-commerce because of climate change. Like the more and more I learn about the planet, will we be selling cosmetics like as aggressively as we do now? Or are we going to be spending less time on computers and more time in the real world? What do you foresee about the sustainability and the longevity of e-commerce?
Yeah. Well, that's a good question. I don't think it's going anywhere in terms of like whether it's Amazon or Shopify, people building their own stores and selling direct to consumers. I don't think it'll go anywhere. But what you're talking about, like the environmental impact and sustainability, I think that's another like a slightly different topic or issue, and that will change. And I think we're seeing customer sentiment show that there is more of an importance and priority on like brands that kind of espouse their sustainable nature, or who focus on things kind of like at a grander scale, larger than just selling more widgets. And so one example here is Patagonia. Patagonia is doing a lot in terms of like how they position their brand, and even not even selling new stuff. I think they've like don't do Black Friday sales because they say nobody needs more stuff. But the point is that the sustainability will probably increase in terms of like how brands are like thinking about it, but I don't think that it will necessarily have an impact on like the upside or the frequency of people buying online. I honestly think that will probably only increase, and we're seeing that now, whether you look at retail stores or malls, or just how Amazon Prime's numbers are going up. That's only because like it has become so obscenely easy to buy online, and to kind of like choose your, like what you're buying and why.
Yeah, no, I think you're dead right. And, it's another thing, I guess, moving from brick and mortar to online stores. But what I'm concerned with is like like Shopify started only, half a decade ago. You now have 17-year-olds who are like, oh, I can just make a 7-figure business. I think that the trend is very interesting to me, of all of these new young entrepreneurs coming in, building stores. We're kind of convincing ourselves that this is the thing to do, buy more stuff. But it's like, it's very interesting because Shopify themselves are kind of sustainable, and they, have like reforesting programs and things like that, while at the same time, encourage like a hyper capitalism. I know you don't work at Shopify. It's kind of it's not really your business, but it is just interesting to me.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I hear you. It's a conundrum, and we're seeing this now with like, global supply chains are being impacted. Food prices, commodity prices, it's becoming more, it's impacting us on an individual level more, where maybe we're realizing that the system at a high level is rather fragile and susceptible to big changes, or changes, like far away, like Ukraine and Russia, and how that's going to impact the ability to plant basic crops, soy and corn and stuff, and that will be, 7 months down the line, food prices are going to be higher. So maybe, focusing on less, as you're saying, and then also more of like less of importing, let's say from China, or reliance on some of these things from overseas. Maybe, I don't know. I'm not necessarily that strong in global economics, but we're all being impacted on an individual basis, every day. So I think you're spot on.
Yeah, you're right too. I think Ukraine grows 20% of the world's wheat for flour, so that's going to be pretty crazy in a few months. I guess e-commerce does encourage small businesses, and therefore kind of local spending. So that's kind of interesting for the environment. Like, the supply chain is incredible. I guess when I started in e-commerce, I didn't really understand just how many New Zealand online stores are just drop shipping.
Oh yeah,
that was an insane realization. Just going through, the stores that I would visit normally, and being like, that's definitely just coming straight from China.
Oh yeah,
that's insane.
Yeah.
And it's like made in New Zealand,
But it's like Apple, designed in California, made in China.
Yeah. But I guess like even just understanding that, I'm hopeful for customers to become more, aware, and shop locally, and save the environment in that way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah, indeed.
I know we've kind of squirreled around a bit. Yeah, I kind of wanted to touch on all of the future topics at the end, and now we've scattered them through.
It was a lot of fun. I love a wide ranging conversation, but I do think e-commerce and customer experience, customer data is kind of like a common thread here. So
no, for sure. I think the internet itself, and I'm keen to see what Web3 does in this area as well, of just upskilling customers. The more that people know, the more educated our society is, the better it's going to be for everybody. So do you see any Web3 projects that are societally improvable or improving mankind?
Yeah, totally. So I think, I'm trying to think of some. I've seen some kind of like social impact DAOs.
Cool.
So a DAO is a decentralized autonomous organization, basically like taking the Web3 and organizing people around a common mission. And so I think for that, yeah, for sure. And then also there are just different coins, like everybody, there are a lot of challenges and concerns with Ethereum and its impact on the environment. Another coin that's specifically kind of built around environmentally friendly stuff is Tezos. So I'm not that familiar with it, but I do know that like the environment is something that everybody is thinking about with ETH, and certainly think about as it relates to money, because it's kind of correlated to gas fees, and so gas fees can certainly spike as more people are running transactions. So yes, I have, but I'm not that familiar with it. But I do know that people are using Web3 as a way to galvanize people around environmental causes.
Yeah. That's DAOs are really interesting. Do you think that companies like your own would utilize a DAO, or how do you think it actually maps onto like real hierarchies in companies?
Yeah, we've toyed with the idea of doing it as a DAO, but haven't yet. And I think like there are technicalities and stuff that might complicate it. But the benefit is that you're getting like more of a collective power. So that could be economic power, where people are like, I'll buy in for $1,000, and then therefore we can pool our money and do something really cool with it. So whether it was last year, people all buying in, like, hey, let's buy an original copy of the Constitution and raise like $40 million in 48 hours. Or there's a Links DAO that's pooling money to buy golf courses, and in putting in money, then you're kind of like investing in this. So I do think that there's definitely going to be like a lot of applications for it, and we were considering it. Haven't yet, but the notion of having a collective group power is really cool. And so we almost think of it like an equivalent of raising outside funding, like say venture funding, except it's crowdfunded. So yeah, we've considered it kind of like at a high level, and I think we'll probably see more brands do it.
Yeah, no, it is very interesting. I'm keen to see it too. More governance and voting power is pretty cool. Just going to step backwards a bit. This is actually was going to be my first question, but
yeah,
when you were discussing how you started with Junglescout and Prehook, you brought up in New York, moved to San Francisco, and now you're in Austin. So I've had a similar sort of move around in my life. I want to know how moving so many times has impacted how you live your life, and if there's any lessons that you've had from moving so much.
Yeah, great question. Well, so I've moved far more times. I didn't want to
go into
the list. But I spent my first 18 years in New York, and then went to college on the East Coast. But probably like one of the best times of my life was like in 2017, when I had like a 1-year-old baby, and it was me and my wife and her, and we had San Francisco was getting very expensive at the time. It was like the peak of rent. And we're like, why are we paying so much to live in a 1-bedroom? And living in a 1-bedroom with a newborn is hard. So we packed up and moved out and decided to kind of like live as digital nomads. It's always been a dream of mine, is if you're working remotely, you can live anywhere. And so we went to Europe, and we're in like Paris and Barcelona and Berlin and Stockholm, and all these like places that I thought were like amazing. And I was living there and working there, and life was good. And we just had like one suitcase each, not a lot. And so it just like the moving part, we're settled here and we live in a small house in Austin. But like I'm kind of simple. I don't need a whole lot to be happy, and certainly don't need a lot of trinkets or things. In fact, I like less things. Just it simplifies my life, and so I think it distilled down what's really important. And so at that time, it was living together and like exploring and kind of like having these adventures. So that's probably the main takeaway, is where you're deriving your like happiness or energy from. And for me, I find like more things kind of just becoming more of a headache and adding to more clutter. So yeah, I like simple.
Yeah, no, I think that's really Nietzsche says amor fati, like you have to love your own fate. So if you know what you thrive on, like that you prefer less things, then you can just lean into that. I'm totally on that buzz, dude. Just don't need anything really. Small backpack.
Fast Wi-Fi.
Yeah. Fast Wi-Fi. Yeah.
Headphones, power.
Yeah. The trade-off with the digital nomad thing, because I've done it for a few years now, is just balancing novel experiences. In like a new city, you can rock up, find a flat pretty quickly. You can do the same thing you've been doing the whole time, but then it's like finding a community in that city. I found that like even being incredibly extroverted, like it's so difficult. But can be incredibly rewarding as well if you find those people that you love.
Totally. And that's why I think like maybe at minimum a month or 3 weeks in one place is good. Because bouncing around, like if you're really trying to work and maintain the focus and productivity of your normal day-to-day, while exploring, it's very hard to cram into less than a month. And I think that's also where you get into a little bit of a local routine, and you might find the restaurants that you like, the coffee shops you like, you might find some interesting people. But absolutely, that's a hard thing of being transient, is ultimately it's about people, you know. So I've never done it solo, but I was in a group called the Dynamite Circle, where, you know, they focus on being location independent entrepreneurs, people doing online stuff. Great group. And so that's kind of like one of the main premises of it, is like, how can you live your best life while working remotely? And
I mean, what do they say?
Well, one of the helpful things is what cities are good. You know, Austin is popular there. Mexico City is a very good digital nomad hub. Lisbon is good for kind of quality of life and cost. And of course, Southeast Asia, Thailand, Bali, Vietnam. You can do your currency, and in my case the dollar, goes far, so you're able to live a nice life at a low cost of living.
Yep. Yeah, that's pretty awesome. I'll throw my hat in the ring. I'd say if you're going to do the digital nomad thing, you should go to rock climbing gyms and martial arts dojos, because you'll meet some lovely people there, or like a community garden. But I spent like, you know, a year in London just trying to learn that lesson. I didn't really get it till the very end. The best digital nomad experience was in Kenya, where you just can't help but make friends just walking down the street.
Nice.
That's what you're saying as well. Is like, you go, there will be some cities where people are just far more receptive to new people. You know, in Nairobi, Mombasa, it's kind of just alien to be walking down the street, and a guy would come up to me, you know, at least once a day and be like, "Hey, what are you doing? Who are you? You want to play a game of basketball? You want to come meet my dad?" And it's just like, this is not something I'm used to.
Totally.
Crazy.
I'm so cynical. I'd be like, "What are you trying to do?"
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
but that's just like that's the beauty of getting outside of your normal comfort zone, is like, that's just, people are just generally nice and welcoming. That's amazing.
Yeah. 99% of people just want to have tea, kids, and laugh. Yeah. Totally. Yeah. Is there anything else that you'd like to touch on? Again, we've covered a nice little range of topics there.
No, I had a great time. Thanks so much for the conversation and having me. If there's anybody that is interested in learning more about how zero-party data works, and a quiz and e-commerce strategy, whatever, happy to talk. My email is gen@prehook.com. Feel free to add it to the show notes or whatever. But yeah, I'm just trying to, you know, like, help as much as possible. So it was a great conversation. Thanks so much for having me, Connor.
Hey, no worries. Thanks for coming. I think your email shout out is a beautiful thing to do. Most people put the Twitter handle. Yeah. I hope that people reach out to you and ask good questions. So it's nice to see that you want to, you know, share your expertise.
Yeah, totally.
All right. Well, I'll let you get back to sunny Austin, and hope you have a lovely day.
Likewise. Thanks, Connor.
All right. Take it easy again. Thanks so much for listening to another episode of Debutify Podcast. If you want to be part of the show, just email us podcast@debutify.com or head over to debutify.com to learn more. Have a great day and good luck with everything.